Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for sticking around to the end of the day. It's always a fairly information overload at these sort of events, and I appreciate you investing your time and energy in attending today. So we're going to talk about core banking workloads on the cloud, and we're going to have to move a little bit faster because we're running a bit short on time. We want to make sure you get a coffee this afternoon. So let's kick off. So we hear a lot of customers and industry folks and analysts tell us that cloud is the new normal. This is the new ubiquitous computing model that all technology is going to be built on in the future. So you can see some quotes there from various publications like the DTCC, the Banker, Wall Street Journal. But let's try and spend some time to understand, in the context of core banking, is this hype or reality? Okay, so what banking workloads are running on cloud today? If we look at the banking segment, so the traditional retail, commercial banking segment, there's a number of established workloads that we see happening today. So analytics, the ability to take information across disparate data sources, across different business units, across different lines of the organization, and bring it together and create some customer insights. So you could call it big data, you can call it analytics, all these sorts of things, but in the end, it's about leveraging the information that we have as an organization. The second is we see a lot of use cases around backup in DR. So we all know that from a regulatory perspective, we have these issues that are presented to us around retention of information, things like write once, read many, and a lot of customers choose to leverage AWS as a storage platform to fulfill those requirements. And the third is about creating digital channels. So more and more customers want to interact with banks in different ways. Mobile-first strategy is pretty common these days. How can we create a great digital experience for our customers? So these are the workloads that are pretty well established and known. And in the kind of the more developing space, innovation around the business function of origination. So how can we actually use sophisticated modern technologies like machine learning to understand insights about our customers and to procure new customers and acquire new customers through different means. So some really interesting stuff happening in that space. Back office transformation is also a pretty common one. So this is where typical functions that have not changed for a long time are now embracing these modern technologies like machine learning, like artificial intelligence. So being able to perform surveillance across my customer transaction data, being able to tackle ongoing issues like anti-money laundering and no KYC. These are all areas where modern cloud technology is having a big impact. Open banking is also a fairly substantial trend these days in the industry. So DSD2 in Europe are pushing these kind of things forward. And we see a lot of customers embracing the various components of the AWS platform in order to achieve these outcomes that they desire around open banking. And finally, we see a lot of traditional banks also launching all new digital banking platforms. So this is where they might launch a complete new subsidiary, a new brand, and enter a new market that they may not have entered before. And they're able to do it very quickly and cheaply compared to how they would traditionally enter a market in the past. So that's the traditional banking side. Thinking more about the capital markets or financial market side, we have a number of established workloads, some similarity and some overlap, very closely aligned in terms of analytics and these sorts of things. From a real-time market data perspective, we've currently got one market data provider and an exchange in Europe who are experimenting with a product called Kinesis to be able to stream information and fan out that market data in a much more efficient and cost-effective manner. Regulatory reporting is also a big one. For those working in capital markets, you'll understand that there's stricter and stricter requirements around near real-time reporting of things like OTC derivatives and these sorts of products. So we see a lot of traction and a lot of excitement, but what I want to drill into today is grid and HPC. So grid is the ability to scale out and horizontally distribute very sophisticated workloads, things like market risk, credit risk, all of these kind of analytics and simulations that we've had to run in the past. There's now a greater demand for these more than ever, and this is because of a lot of upcoming regulatory changes that are driving these needs to scale out grid a lot faster. So one of those is informally known as Basel IV, or FRTB, Fundamental Review of the Trading Book. So this is a new set of rules and regulations that a lot of banks are going to be impacted by, depending on which markets you actually trade in. And it imposes a whole bunch of new stricter requirements on various businesses about how they manage their books. So we now need to split the bank-owned book from the customer-facing book. We now need to do our pricing simulation on a much longer horizon. So previously we would have to simulate to 10 days out. Depending on the instrument type, it can now be up to 40 days. Managing VAR and expected shortfall, so stricter capital requirements around the expected shortfall. So what does this mean from a technology perspective? We're about to undergo a significant step change in the amount of computing power that we need, amount of data that we're dealing with and the velocity of that data, and compressed timelines. We no longer have a 24-hour SLA to deliver information to the regulator. If they call in the morning, they want it that same day. So these are challenges, but they also bring opportunities, the ability to reform and re-engineer our systems and make them something that is going to be robust well into the future. Okay, so which financial institutions are actually transforming themselves on cloud? We'll talk about a few specific cases. So in Australia, we have Commonwealth Bank as a publicly available reference customer. They're doing some great things. DBS here, we're going to hear from DBS a little later in this presentation. Through to the London Stock Exchange and BBVA in Europe, MFUG in Japan, NASDAQ, Capital One, FINRA in North America. So these are actual customers who are running production workloads today on cloud. These are not banks who are going through an experimental phase. These are banks that are actually tackling their cloud journey and migrating systems onto AWS. So just from the customer perspective, we also have this really important concept that we need our vendors and our technology partners to come with us. So today, more and more technology vendors in the banking industry are certifying their application and they're certifying their systems to run on AWS. So from Mambu, which is a born-in-the-cloud core banking platform, through to the names that we all know like Murex and Finacle. So this ecosystem continues to evolve. This is not a definitive list. And if you are working with a technology vendor and they haven't kind of given you any assurances around AWS, come and talk to us and we're more than happy to engage with that particular technology and vendor. So let's drill into some of these examples. Murex has publicly announced in December last year that their MX3 platform is going to be supported on AWS. And we're going through and finalizing that position now. Murex will be on part of the panel after this presentation. So if you want to hear more about that, highly recommend you come back after the break. And similarly, from Finacle or Edgeverve, back in July last year, they've now certified their suite of the Finacle suite of solutions on AWS. So this means it's unblocked a major issue in migrating core systems in that the vendor has given you continued assurance and support. And similarly, FICO, not just from a technology perspective, but as a company have made a decision to go cloud native and cloud first. So this is their cloud first strategy. They've already begun to migrate their decision-making systems, their credit scoring systems, their public-facing websites, their consumer-facing applications, and they're making great progress on that today. So we've kind of addressed the fact that there are many banks today and many financial institutions using AWS Cloud for material or core workloads. But of course, to get there, that comes with some challenges. It's a fairly big change in any institution to try and embark on such a project. So there's a number of challenges that we need to address, and there's a foundation that we need to build before we try and execute any sort of migration journey. And the first, of course, is security. This is the first thing that always comes up in any conversation with any financial institution. Miles, I think if you're around for the previous talk, he gave a great overview about how we address this. So this is the quote from Gartner. I do not by any means want to trivialize the concerns that you may have around security and information protection. For banks, that customer data, that transaction data is the absolute crown jewels of the company, and if you lose trust with your customers, it's no good. So needless to say, if you didn't catch Miles' session earlier, I'd recommend you go and watch it on the replay. We have a whole comprehensive suite of tools and services and products to take your controls and your internal controls that you may have, your regulatory controls that you may have, and actually build those controls on the cloud. The second is usually regulatory. We need to have a regulatory discussion about dealing with outsourcing to a cloud provider. So this was mentioned earlier. These are the 4 publicly available white papers. So Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, and India. And this does not kind of define where that regulatory conversation begins and ends. These are just white papers that are approved for public distribution and are available to you today. If you want to embark on a cloud migration or, of any kind in any market, please come and talk to us, whether it's Australia, Europe, North America, any country within ASEAN. We are here to work with you and help you work through those regulatory concerns and challenges. Okay, so security, we've kind of covered. Regulatory, we need to think about as well. But really, addressing all of these comes back down to building a strong foundation. So we need to build a good foundation around security. We need to build a good foundation around compliance. And then also thinking about the larger contractual relationships and all these sorts of things that feed into all of this. So from a security perspective, we continue to evolve the security ecosystem. Really interesting, advanced security solutions like Macy and GuardDuty that apply AI and machine learning to your actual security challenges. Rigorous and sustainable identity access management, something that's really important to get early on. Who has access to what, and we do that in a way that's appropriate for our particular organization. From a compliance perspective, all of the security certifications and assurance programs that we run, we make those reports available to your compliance teams on demand. So if you want a copy of the SOC 2 report, if you want a copy of the ISO 27001 certificate, it's as simple as logging into the AWS console, and there's a service there called Artifact. Now use Artifact to download these reports, and then at any time you can engage with your account management team at AWS, and we can provide further clarification where required. The ability to perform informed control assessments. So being able to understand, this is my internal policy, how do I map this to my environment in the cloud? And I think a big one that we don't really talk too much about, but is quite a big benefit, is the centralized management and control over these services. So we saw a bit earlier today services like CloudTrail, which are able to provide a really robust audit history of everything that occurs in my AWS infrastructure. It's just not possible today with disparate data centers, disparate technologies, disparate suites of tools. So something that's really important to consider as well. And from an onboarding perspective, another thing that's not really well known in the industry is we do provide enterprise agreements. So these are legal contracts between your bank or entity and Amazon Web Services. And this is where we can deal with some of the more fine-grained issues that you might have. So this could be things like agency audit rights to data centers, data processing agreements, these sorts of things. We can deal with them from a legal perspective, and we would expect every bank that we interact with to have an enterprise agreement in place. So there's lots of things to consider there in how we build our cloud foundation. How do we build something that's really solid, that we know going forward we have assurances around security, around compliance, we're comfortable that we know what's happening in our environment. So a great way to get started is the cloud adoption framework. Even if you do have some cloud-related projects today, the cloud adoption framework allows you to crystallize a lot of these issues and a lot of these concerns and actually map them back into plans of action. So we built the cloud adoption framework through our professional services business, and this is their institutional knowledge that they've gained over thousands, tens of thousands of engagements, all distilled down into one framework for any customer to use today. And you might note it's quite interesting because we organize all the issues and topics that we need to cover in 6 different themes, or perspectives as we call them. Now, only 3 of those actually relate to technology. So they're the ones on the right-hand side in orange: platform, security, and operations. The reality is any cloud migration or cloud journey within a large enterprise also needs equal consideration given to the non-technical aspects. So this is things like how we manage our business engagement, how we transform our people, how do we reskill, how do we get people engaged and excited and energized about these projects, and of course governance. So covering all people and process and all these different kind of non-technical issues is just as important to a successful cloud migration as the actual technology piece. Okay, so we've kind of talked about how the industry is heading, what some of the challenges are about embarking on a particular project. How do we actually get there? So these are some of the pathways that your organization can take to executing a cloud migration project for some core or critical workload within your organization. So we're going to start here, and this is what we affectionately call the 6 R's, okay? This is our 6R migration model. Bear with me here. We're going to paint a picture. So it starts by doing an assessment of the particular application. We need to dive into it. We need to evaluate it against a bunch of criteria, and that will give us our decision tree logic about what path we actually take. So that first path might be just to retain and leave it as is, status quo. We're not going to migrate the app, or we might choose to revisit this in the future. The second R is we might actually have that application slated for retirement. So in the future, we know 6 months' time, that app is going away. There's no point in investing time, energy, effort into actually migrating that. The first R that actually results in a migration is what we call rehosting, or more affectionately known as lift and shift, okay? So this is where we pick up an application, we reinstall it on our new cloud-based infrastructure, we rebuild it on a new database, and we have some sort of phased cutover where our users come in one morning, and now their back end is sitting on cloud rather than on-premise. So we can do this in an automated or a somewhat manual way. Depending on the scale, the number of applications you're trying to use, different approaches apply. The second R is replatforming. So this is where we're still migrating the app almost as is, but we're going to make some cosmetic changes. Well, we're going to make some changes along the way. So we might choose to upgrade the operating system because it's running on Windows Server 2003, and that's an old OS. So this is the catalyst. When we do the migration, we say, hey, since we're going to this effort, why don't we take a little bit more effort and improve the overall end state of the deployment that we're actually doing. The third is repurchase. So we might decide to discard that application altogether and replace it with a new product. Perhaps that's that we've stopped paying maintenance on that particular application, and now we're thinking about acquiring a new commercial off-the-shelf product. So in that case, all we're doing is replacing one with a new, an old with a new. We might be moving to a SaaS-based model. We don't want to actually run that anymore. We were going to take a SaaS subscription for that particular product. And the final one is refactoring. And this is where we might have had an application that we've built in-house over a very long time, and we say, let's tear this thing to bits and let's bring it into the more modern architecture, the more modern times. So we go from perhaps a very monolithic, large Java application, and we say, hey, that we know from our experience running this application that it doesn't actually scale. So let's start to decompose that large monolith into smaller pieces and build it, under a more modern kind of microservices type architecture. So this one is obviously the most expensive in terms of effort and time because you need to go through a full software delivery lifecycle. It's a significant change in the business, but it obviously has the greatest benefits in the end. So for core systems in banks, what are the options available to us? Well, for the purpose of this talk, we're not going to retain, and we're not going to retire. But interestingly, core systems or very critical, complex, large applications probably not well suited towards rehosting because it's not as straightforward as lift and shift. There's quite a number of technical challenges in addressing that. So with that in mind, thinking about replatforming, repurchasing, and refactoring, let's have a look at what some of the drivers are for each of those cases. So replatforming, you might use as an opportunity to exit a particular database technology. Okay, so we know that we've hit the limitation here, or we want to embrace open source databases, or we want to use some cloud-native services like Amazon Aurora. So this is a great time at the time of migration to actually achieve those outcomes. And we see a lot of customers who are swapping proprietary databases for open source databases. We might also use the opportunity to do an OS upgrade. So moving off that very old operating system into something new, and then we know we're going to get another 5 to 10 years of life out of this particular application. So that's replatforming. Repurchasing is where we've decided, hey, we don't want to go through the effort of developing a whole new platform from scratch, or we don't have the internal capability to do so. Let's go off into the market and see what's available from a vendor perspective. So I want to call out Mambu because these guys have built a core banking platform natively on cloud. It's a really exciting product. We're seeing some incredible traction in Southeast Asia with banks embracing this particular software. And the example here we have is Oak North, which is a UK fully licensed bank in the EU, or now the UK, that has launched a fully digital bank with one CTO and a team of 6 outsourced technical folks, and they did it in 3 months. So really, this idea of a core banking project being something very big and expensive and multi-year is starting to shift a little bit with products like Mambu. So what we see a lot of customers say is, I want to launch into Vietnam, where I have a banking license, but I don't actually do any kind of real business there. So I'm going to launch using a cloud-native banking platform. And then finally, for refactoring, we've got this concept that we need to rebuild our system from scratch. And that is what FINRA has recently gone through. So organizations that have the capability to deliver software at scale, maybe they've gone through a transformation already where they've embraced practices like agile delivery, they've embraced DevOps models and these sorts of things, and they know that they have the capability to quickly deliver and then iterate on their product. So FINRA actually is the market surveillance authority in the United States across every public exchange. So how many events do you think that they have to deal with per day? These guys crunch 35 billion rows of data per day on their platform that they built from scratch on AWS. Very, very impressive piece of technology. Okay, so I've spoken a lot about what's happening, the challenges, those sorts of things. I don't want it to be just an AWS person talking to you, telling you about all this stuff. So it's my very great pleasure to introduce on stage Sandra Stonham, the Managing Director for Technology and Operations at DBS.
Thank you, John. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sandra Stonham from DBS. I work in technology and operations, specifically looking after our trading systems technology. So today I'm going to share a little bit with you about DBS, for those of you who are not familiar. And then I'll talk to you about our technology transformation. And then I'll share with you a particular example of where we've taken our trading systems grid compute and put that onto AWS. So firstly, a little bit about DBS. DBS is the largest bank in Southeast Asia. We actually have over 7 million consumer banking customers and over 200,000 institutional banking customers. And we have a global staff of over 24,000 people. So I'll tell you a little bit about our technology transformation. You're probably aware with banks that banks typically have a lot of legacy systems, some of them many decades old, some of them very monolithic and hard to change. But our users, and indeed our customers, and indeed ourselves, we're very influenced by what we see around us. So what we see from the tech giants, we see nimble, fast-to-change applications, highly resilient, and operating at a lower price point than ours. And that encouraged us to take a long, hard look at ourselves from the outside in. We really went and looked at the tech giants and we said, what are they doing that we're not doing? And what can we learn from that? And how do we need to transform ourselves? And we came up with this whole technology transformation strategy. We call it Gandalf. We came up with this technology transformation strategy to completely transform ourselves across the organization. And you can see that it's made up of 5 main themes. This diagram here, this shows you what we call our Gandalf cheese wheel, for obvious reasons. So it's made up of 5 main cheeses, and each of those has a number of sub-themes. And that really is our strategy, and that's really galvanizing the transformation across our organization. So if you look at the yellow and the green cheese, the yellow is designed for modern systems, and the green is automate everything. So if you look at the yellow and the green cheese, that specifically drives the technology transformation. And the way that we look at that is we look at that in 3 main transformation journeys. So we have an infrastructure transformation, we have an application transformation, and we have an automation transformation. And each of these journeys is a multi-year journey, so please don't beat yourself up if it takes a while. Each of these journeys is a multi-year journey, and they all need to come together and work hand in hand to be truly effective. So if you look at where we're at with our infrastructure transformation, we have absolutely been migrating our infrastructure away from old physical servers and moving it all onto our virtual private cloud. And you can see here over a number of years, and it's taken us since 2013 to make this reduction, we've now reduced our physical server footprint by 80%. And in fact, if you take out the servers that are actually our strategic virtual private cloud servers, actually by 90%. So it's been a long, hard effort. Similarly, in our application transformation, this one was tougher to measure, but in the end, we managed to bucket our applications. We labeled them as either being traditional, or cloud-ready, cloud-optimized, or cloud-native. And you can see that from 2014, where we had less than 10% that were on any form of cloud, even cloud-ready, by the end of 2018, we're going to have less than 10% left as being traditional. So that's been an enormous transformation of our applications. And then for our automation journey, so this is where we really invested in the DevOps. And the way that we measured this is our cadence of deployment. So this is how frequently we released. And so relative to this benchmark in 2014, we've actually increased our release cadence by 7.5 times. And you can see that the curve is now starting to go exponentially up. So we're very pleased with that progress. So that's a little bit about our technology transformation. Now what I'm going to share with you is this workload, this trading systems grid that we've put onto AWS. So with trading systems, what tends to happen is that they tend to have this grid for doing a lot of compute. So trading systems pass these small workloads to the grid, and the grid just computes and passes the result back. And these workloads could be risk computations, where we do multiple calculations to calculate risk under various different market conditions. It could be pricing, it could be simulations. But essentially, it's microcompute workloads that get passed to this grid. And DBS is very typical in this regard, but I'm sure all trading systems have this. So you can see here the grid, and the grid is really made up of hundreds, or was, made up of hundreds of physical servers. And so this has to cater for peak-of-peak capacity, because obviously your time to market, which actually includes sticking another blade in there and connecting it up, your time to market is very slow. So you've really got to cater for peak-of-peak capacity at any time. In addition, you've got to have 100% spare capacity sitting in an alternative data center in case your data center fails. And quite often, when you have to actually invoke that spare capacity, quite often it takes manual intervention as well. So a lot of shortcomings associated with this. Let's say hundreds of servers cater for peak of peak. You've got to have 100% spare capacity, manual intervention for failover, slow time to market. Basically, the whole thing sucks. So what does it look like now? And so what we've done now is we've got the same microcompute workloads, but this is where these transformation journeys come in. So look at the right-hand side. This is as a result of our infrastructure transformation journey. So instead of having physical servers, we've now got virtual private cloud. And you can see virtual private cloud 1 and 2, that represents our 2 different data centers. And in that virtual private cloud, I'm not sure that you can see this at the back, but in that virtual private cloud, what you can see is I've colored it in 2 different colors. And what that does is that shows you that the normal bank workload would operate in 50% of that capacity in each data center. Why is that? Because if one data center fails, it needs to fail over to the other data center. We need enough capacity to run our entire workload. That has a huge advantage for my grid, because what it does is it tells me that I can run my grid in the spare capacity. So I can really optimize my use of the virtual private cloud. So I set up all my grid servers, now virtual servers, in the spare capacity on the virtual private cloud. What else do I have in my infrastructure transformation? I can now also scale up into AWS. So you can see AWS is there as well as an extended data center for us. So that's the infrastructure piece. Now, what else have I done? This is where the automation transformation comes in. So we've now introduced automation. So what happens with the automation is this, that the automation is actually monitoring. You can see here that we're actually monitoring the number of tasks in the queue and the wait time in the queue to be able to send those tasks to the grid. So if the servers that I've got available on the virtual private cloud are not enough, and I need to increase the number of servers, I'll see, you can see the red there, the red is showing a buildup of tasks in the queue. And that obviously then results in a queue wait time. And then you can see that automatically we can go onto AWS and provision servers. So when we see a buildup of wait time like that, we can actually automatically provision additional servers, which then increase the capacity on our grid and allow us to process more tasks, and so then the wait time comes back down. And as the wait time comes back down to 0 again, in other words, I've got enough servers available, I can automatically decommission those servers that I'd scaled up to in AWS. So this tells you that what I can do is now we've got to a situation where I actually have 0 dedicated server capacity. I have 100% automated real-time provisioning, failover, recovery. My time to market is instantaneous. And I can also have the ability to optimize the virtual private cloud. And I want to highlight a little bit about also what happens in that disaster recovery situation that I mentioned. If one of my data centers fails and the entire bank workload fails over onto the other data center, and my grid takes the lowest priority, guess what happens? That automation that I described that monitors the wait time on the queue, that says, oh, I've got a lot of things in the queue, I better fire up a lot of instances on AWS. AWS becomes my contingency plan. It becomes my disaster recovery. Those instances stay until my primary data center comes back online, until my grid can go back onto the virtual private cloud. So that also offers me failover resilience as well. So complete ability to optimize the use of VPC while not compromising my disaster recovery. We've managed to achieve a 70% cost reduction so far just by decommissioning all of those physical servers and not catering for peak of peak. We anticipate that we'll be able to, in the long term, achieve a 90% cost reduction. This will come from better predictive modeling of our workloads and also taking advantage of features like AWS spot pricing. So then we anticipate we'll get 90% overall. Thank you for listening. I'm Sandra Stonham from DBS. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Small gift for you. Thank you. Okay, what a cool story, right? That's real-world banking workloads, critical to the business, mission critical, running on cloud. Super exciting, and thank you very much to Sandra and DBS for sharing that story with us. And just to mention, Sandra will be on a panel after the break in this room with Murex and a few other people. I highly recommend you come back for that one. So, core banking on Amazon Web Services. Is it real? Yes, is the answer. Okay, good, you got it. But how do we achieve it? Just to recap, we need to think about security, compliance, regulatory, no doubt. These are the people in our organization that are stakeholders to a successful project. Please bring them with you. Please engage them early. And we are more than happy to come and talk to your internal teams and show them how other banks have been doing it and how to achieve the outcomes that you want. So first one, security, risk, compliance, regulatory. Then we need to build a strong foundation. So using tools like the Cloud Adoption Framework can help us on that particular journey. The third is vendor support or technology partner support. We need the support from our technology partners whose systems we run today. And finally, a strong partnership with AWS to help you on this journey and beyond. Thank you very much for your time. My name's John Austin. Go and grab yourself a coffee. You've earned it, and we'll see you after the break.